Today, I wanted to talk about one of the starship specializations in Star Trek Online, specifically Miracle Worker, because I've touched on this before, and I know Casual SAB has talked about this a number of times as well. Miracle Worker has kind of fallen behind a lot of the other specializations in Star Trek Online, largely because it's one of two specializations that has yet to get any sort of revamp or revisit, like some of the past others have. Like Command got a major rework a while back. Intel was the first to get a major rework. Pilot even got one, which Pilot probably needed it the most. But the only two that haven't gotten it are Temporal and Miracle Worker. And frankly, Temporal's in a pretty good place. It really doesn't need nearly as much help as Miracle Worker does. So let's start with the general vibe of what a Miracle Worker ship is. Miracle Worker ships are generally considered to be good for weapons-based builds, particularly energy weapons because of abilities like narrow sensor bands and mixed armament synergy, but they also have some decent abilities for tanking, stuff like... There we go. Other abilities like aligned shield frequencies. This is kind of give the idea of it could be used as like a support tank, particularly with shields. Other stuff like nanite repair payload, meant to give kind of a healer vibe. So it's meant to be sort of a multi-purpose role of either damage or like healing support. But the problem is, it's never really excelled at any sort of like healed or tanking role in comparison to something like Command. But even in like the damage department, it's fallen behind in a lot of the areas, particularly behind Intel, which has really excelled in the place of energy weapon builds, largely due to abilities like override subsystem safeties. Now, before I get into some of the real issues that are problems for Miracle Worker, let's talk about the upsides to Miracle Worker. And the big upside with Miracle Worker is the extra universal console slot that you get with full Miracle Worker ships. These are ships that have a full commander level Miracle Worker seat, as well as the Miracle Worker specialization, or the ship mechanic, the innovation mechanic. These also get a full extra console slot, a universal console slot at that. So that means you can put any type of console there, though these days a lot of the meta just revolves around various universal consoles that you get off of ships that have clicky abilities. But yeah, that is a big thing, and it's not to be understated as well, I think, because like I said, consoles are very important to a build, and being able to get a whole extra console on there is potentially a very powerful thing, especially if you have proper cooldown reduction for your consoles, using things like unconventional systems and the console off the Vovine Obelisk carrier. Those will go a long way to getting those cooldowns as low as you possibly can, and be able to allow you to be able to use those consoles that much more quickly. So with a Miracle Worker ship, you're going to have one additional console on top of that, and depending on what that console is, could be a big thing for that build. Now, the problem with Miracle Worker is that that's kind of the only upside these days, and that's a problem for Miracle Worker, particularly Miracle Worker seating in general, just because that extra console slot is only going to be available on full spec Miracle Worker ships, like the Lexington here, which is a full Miracle Worker ship with a commander level Miracle Worker seat and the innovation mechanic. And so, ships with secondary Miracle Worker seating, like the Legendary Akira here, this is a command ship, but does have a secondary Miracle Worker seat. This will not benefit from that extra universal console slot because it is not a full Miracle Worker ship. It just has a Miracle Worker seat on it. So that's kind of one of the major issues for Miracle Worker right now, is that the Bridge Officer abilities through the Miracle Worker specialization just aren't that valuable on their own. And on a lot of times, they don't mesh well with other specializations here. Like this ship in particular is a great example. This is a Command Miracle Worker ship here, and one of the big problems with pairing Command and Miracle Worker is that neither of these specializations have any abilities that trigger unconventional systems, which, as I stated earlier, is a big part of the meta because of its ability to reduce the cooldowns of your universal consoles, which I know there's a few of you who are absolutely tired of hearing about the unconventional systems meta, but until we get some other way of lowering our console cooldowns that could potentially replace Uncon, Uncon's going to be here to stay. So it's not my fault that lowering your console cooldowns is so crazy powerful. So as long as that's part of the meta, that's going to be here to stay. Yeah. the lack of uncon triggers is one of the big problems with Miracle Worker, and it's weird too because it has two abilities that sound like they should be unconventional systems triggers, but aren't for some reason. The way unconventional systems works is that every time you activate a control ability, it will lower the cooldown of any of your it will lower the active cooldown of any of your universal consoles by a certain percentage every time you activate one of those control abilities. And Miracle Worker has two abilities that are defined as control abilities. Deploy Gravitic Induction Platform is an AoE pull ability, and Null Pointer Flood here is an AoE confuse type ability, and a Placate, both of which are control effects. So the fact that neither of these trigger unconventional systems is just really weird. And this is something we have seen before with some of the older specializations, like when back in the day, the ability Clean Getaway in the pilot specialization, that is also a control ability, but that didn't trigger unconventional systems back in the day. That's just because no one thought to hook it up when the specialization was made, or when the trait was made. I don't know which one came first, actually, but it's just no one thought to link in some of the specialization abilities as they were made later. And as when when Pilot got revamped, they corrected that and made it, because that control ability should be triggering unconventional systems, they linked those two together, and now Pilot has an unconventional systems trigger, which has really helped out the Pilot specialization. Now, I remember on a 10-4 weekly live stream, I once asked this question to Jesse Heining: why don't these abilities trigger unconventional systems? And he didn't really explain why Null Pointer Flood doesn't trigger it, but he did explain that Deploy Gravitic Induction Platform doesn't trigger unconventional systems because it actually deploys a pet, basically, and the pet is what is creating the pull effect, which I still think is kind of a lame excuse for this not triggering uncon. I do think this should still trigger uncon, but that was his reasoning for it. So I guess you could, keep with that if you really wanted to. I don't agree with it, but whatever. But that still doesn't explain why Null Pointer Flood isn't a trigger for unconventional systems. So, like, even just getting Null Pointer Flood here as an uncon trigger would go a long way to improving just the seating for Miracle Worker. But for real, 2 would be better than 1, and even then, having both of them as uncon triggers probably wouldn't make like a huge impact on the specialization, or just the ship balance in general. Especially because deploy Gravitic Induction Platform, I need a shorter way of saying this. It's a higher level ability. Only ships with a Lieutenant Commander Miracle Worker seat or higher will even be able to use this. And even then, if you're running this, if you're running like an energy weapon build, most people are going to be using narrow sensor bands in that seat anyway. So this one probably isn't going to get a lot of use on energy weapon builds, but this would go a long way of helping out like Miracle Worker or science ships. Torpedo build ships or science ships with Miracle Worker seating. And God, we all know that Miracle Worker could definitely use some science help, because Miracle Worker has so little to offer for science builds. Which is kind of one of my my next gripes there, is that it has so little to offer for EPG builds, because really the only thing here that deals any sort of exotic damage is destabilized warp core, and you can get some okay damage over time radiation effects out of this thing, but it really needs a bigger boost than it has in order for it to make any real impact. And because what it really needs is some sort of anomaly ability, because anomalies are the big thing for EPG builds, because they trigger spore infused anomalies, which is that's been part of the science meta for ages. So reconfiguring to one of these abilities into some sort of anomaly that would trigger spore infused anomalies would go a long way for science builds. Another big weakness in the Miracle Worker Bridge Officer abilities is actually in 2 of the more popular Bridge Officer abilities in the specializations. That's narrow sensor bands and mixed armament synergies. And that's largely because they have very low uptimes, or rather, they have very low active times. Because narrow sensor bands only has an active time of 10 seconds, which is not long. Like, in comparison, another very popular one for energy weapon builds is override subsystem safeties from the Intel specialization. That has an uptime for 20 seconds, literally twice as long as narrow sensor bands. And while OSS does have some other drawbacks, like it will disable one of your subsystems and it has a longer cooldown, there are ways around that. Like proper cooldown management makes that longer cooldown less of an issue, and you can always bring back your more vital subsystems that were disabled with something like an emergency power ability. I know Casual SAB can speak better to the actual numbers than I can. He's got a much better head for that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just the narrow sensor bands just doesn't keep up like it used to, and mixed armament synergy is kind of in the same position. It doesn't let you it doesn't give you enough uptime to actually do what you want to do with it. Now, I've got one more thing I want to talk about with the specializations, and that is the firing mode for the Miracle Worker specialization, exceed rated limits. Two of the other specializations have their own unique firing modes, kind of like this. Like Intel has surgical strikes, and Pilot has reroute reserves to weapons. Command and Temporal, not so much. They do have abilities that are kind of like firing modes, but they work a bit different, so we're not going to really talk about those. But the surgical strikes and reroute reserves to weapons are really comparable to exceed rated limits, because they are firing modes that affect your energy weapons. They will effectively replace abilities like beam overload or fire at will or scatter volley, stuff like that. And the thing is, exceed rated limits, just like a lot of the other bridge officer seating, has really fallen behind those other two firing modes. Like surgical strikes is a very powerful ability. Reroute reserves to weapons is nearly as powerful, and that's kind of the problem, because exceed rated limits, well, it sucks. The way ERL works is that it gives your energy weapons a 100% firing cycle haste, which sounds really good on paper, but we'll get back to that. It will also set the weapon power drain to 0 of your weapons, but in turn, it will also apply a damage over time effect in the form of electrical damage to your ship, so you'll receive a certain amount of electrical damage every single second, and it will gradually decrease your power levels by a certain amount every 1 second. So the entire time it's active, you're basically hurting yourself and draining your power at the same time, in exchange for 0 weapon power cost and a 100% boost to your firing cycle haste for your energy weapons. Now, if a firing mode that buffs firing cycle haste sounds familiar, it should, because it's nearly identical to the effect that reroute reserves to weapons has from the Pilot specialization, because reroute reserves to weapons also sets your weapon power drain to 0 and gives you a large firing cycle haste. Though the one that reroute reserves to weapons 3 gives you is 225% boost instead of the 100% that ERL 3 gives you. Reroute reserves to weapons also provides a power drain, but instead of draining all of your power, it just drains your engine power. Now, before the Pilot revamp, it was generally considered that reroute reserves to weapons was just the crappier version of exceed rated limits, but since the Pilot revamp, that's been reversed now. Now, exceed rated limits is just the crappy version of reroute reserves to weapons. Now, while surgical strikes from the Intel specialization works a bit differently, they're all just single target firing modes in the end. So the way I think they need to fix exceed rated limits is to not just give it a damage boost, but to fundamentally make its function different. Instead of being just another single target firing mode, frankly, I feel like they need to make exceed rated limits a multi-target firing mode, something akin to fire at will or scatter volley. This would go a long way to giving exceed rated limits an identity of its own. Because right now, it's just, like I said, it's just the crappy version of reroute reserves to weapons. Both just give massive boosts to firing cycle haste in exchange for some weapon drain. But it's just that reroute reserves to weapons does it a lot better than exceed rated limits. So you need to do something to change up exceed rated limits, otherwise both abilities just feel exactly the same, and that's dumb. Because at least with surgical strikes from the Intel specialization, while that is also a single target ability, what surgical strikes does, it actually it actually worsens your firing cycle haste, but in exchange for that, it drastically boosts your crit chance and crit severity. So that means Surgical Strikes is much more focused on crit chance and crit severity and stuff like that. Mainly crit severity, because it'll max out your crit chance so high you won't even need to bother about with crit chance. You just have to focus on further buffing your crit severity. But with reroute reserves to weapons and exceed rated limits, you're basically just doing the same thing to the same stat. So they feel too much the same, and that's why I feel like exceed rated limits needs to be changed to a multi-targeting firing mode. And yes, this obviously has to do with the fact that I prefer multi-targeting builds rather than single-target builds. I'm very public about this. Most of my builds are pretty much just fire at will or scatter volley builds these days, because I'm so sick of single-target builds. But that's the thing. It would be really nice if we had a specialization firing mode that was a multi-targeted firing mode, because I don't know how many times I need to say it. Exceed rated limits needs something more to differentiate from itself from reroute reserves to weapons, and making it a multi-targeting mode would go a long way to do that. But yeah, it also needs a damage boost too, because there's 100% compared to the 225 you're getting from reroute reserves to weapons. That's insane. So yeah, those are the major problems with Miracle Worker seeding. It needs uncon triggers, which it has 2 abilities that should be uncon triggers, but for some reason aren't. It needs better support for exotic damage abilities, stuff that deals radiation damage or electrical damage, or some sort of exotic damage to better support EPG builds. Even the more popular abilities in the specialization, like narrow sensor bands and mixed armament synergy, their active timers need to be looked at, because that 10 seconds is just not keeping up with the longer uptimes of the other specializations. And the specialization's firing mode, exceed rated limits, just needs a complete rework. Like I said, it would be absolutely fantastic if it could be worked into a multi-targeting ability, kind of like fire at will or scatter volley. Like, I'm not totally sure how you could get that to work with both beams and cannons, because that's how specialization firing modes work. They're supposed to work with both beams and cannons, but being able to get that to work would be absolutely amazing, because like I said, exceed rated limits needs an identity that will better separate itself from reroute reserves to weapons, and being just another single target ability that also buffs firing cycle haste is not the way to do that. And frankly, single target firing modes are boring as all hell. Beam overload, surgical strikes, rapid fire, they're all terrible. I hate them all. I only use fire at will and scatter volley these days, and it would be really nice to add exceed rated limits into that mix too, if you make that into a multi-targeting firing mode, because that would just be a really nice change of pace, just to be able to use something different, even if it is only on Miracle Worker ships. But yeah, those are the issues with Miracle Worker seeding. There is one other issue too with Miracle Worker, and that's the ship mechanic, the innovation mechanic, which I know I've never been super into it. Like, it has some neat abilities. The way the innovation mechanic works is that it's actually several abilities built into the mechanic that are all based off of this RNG factor. Basically, you have this little, like, Simon Says thing here, which you have to activate any 3 of a tactical, engineering, or science ability. Like here, I have to activate a tactical and 2 engineering abilities. So I activate tactical. Hold on, I have to wait a few seconds because I only have 2 engineering abilities. There we go. And now it's activated this special ability, which is, I think it's just some sort of damage reduction thing. I actually didn't read the tooltip on it. But yeah, it's any number of, I think it's 5 different abilities that you will get just through doing that. And for one, you can see the uptime of that was not very long. So another thing that probably needs uptime looked at. But at the same time, the Miracle Worker ship mechanic really isn't very powerful, especially when you look at it compared to the Intel and Command or the Temporal ship mechanics. Those are all very powerful, so it makes the Miracle Worker one look kind of dinky. But I feel like the Miracle Worker ship mechanic kind of has to be kind of dinky, because you're already getting that extra console slot along with it. So you kind of have to balance that in mind. You can't have a crazy powerful innovation mechanic and still have that extra console slot. Otherwise, that just you really screws with the balance of all the different specializations, and there's already very little balance to begin with. So you don't want to screw with that even more. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. I know people would probably bring that up, saying, hey, the innovation mechanic kind of sucks, and frankly, I think it kind of needs to suck to compensate for the fact that you're getting that whole extra console slot. Yeah, those are my gripes with the American Worker Specialization, mainly with the American Worker Specialization seating, which really needs a really needs a look at. Like some of the other specializations have gotten attention in the past, and hopefully time can be made for DECA to get a look at American Worker 2 to give it the same treatment, because it really needs work. And I know the my suggestion on exceed rated limits is probably a long shot in making it a multi-targeting ability, but I really do feel like that is the way to go for it, because as it is, it has no identity of its own, and that's kind of the whole point of these different specialization firing modes, is that it's meant to give you just a different feel for being able to use your weapons, and it doesn't do that. It just does the same thing as a totally different ability, just worse. And even then, just as a single target ability, it's just going to feel like all the other single target abilities. So why not give a little bit more love to the multi-targeting abilities, which are more fun anyway? But yeah, those are my opinions on the topic. Hopefully someone is listening to them at DECA. That's all I can really hope for with these videos, that someone is listening and thinks I have some kind of point and don't sound like just a rambling idiot who is just angry that things don't show up on the DPS boards. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought down below in the comments, and while you're down there, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all the usual outro stuff. If you'd like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button to become a member for additional channel perks, or you can find the link to the merch store, or check out the various affiliate links in the pinned comment. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.